As a child, Jessé was a quiet person who attended church and was always passive. He liked to play soccer and was sociable with the people around him. His family was considered a model, with a serious father who was committed to the family, a loving mother, and a welcoming home. However, at the age of 14, things changed. It was one night when Jessé, driven by an insatiable curiosity, decided to investigate what his father did during his monthly absences. He knew that his father always disappeared from home for a couple of days every month, but he had never questioned it. Now he felt an imperative need to find out what was behind these absences. While searching his father's room, Jessé found a hidden folder full of photos of dead people with a Bible on his chest. That night, Jessé felt something in his heart, a feeling he could not explain. It was as if he had discovered a forbidden secret, a secret that connected him to a greater mission. Without telling his parents, Jessé began to learn how to use weapons and kill animals. It was as if he was preparing for something, although he did not know exactly what it was. At the age of 16, Jessé felt ready to execute his plan. In the shadows of the vibrant metropolis of Chicago, a sinister figure emerged who terrorized the city and defied human comprehension. Jessé, nicknamed the Faith Maniac. His brutal and meticulously orchestrated crimes were not mere acts of random violence, but rather twisted manifestations of religious belief taken to the extreme. Jessé was no ordinary killer. He was a self-proclaimed divine vigilante, imbued with a sinister heavenly mission. He believed he was carrying out God's will by eliminating those he considered sinful and corrupt. The Chicago police were baffled by the crimes, which seemed to have no connection to one another. The victims were of varying ages, genders, and backgrounds, and there was no evidence of motive or connection between them. However, there was one thing that connected all the crimes: a Bible left at the crime scene with a passage underlined. The passage was always the same: "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." John 14:6. The police knew they were dealing with a serial killer, but they had no clue as to his identity or motive. Fear and uncertainty spread throughout the city as the police worked hard to capture the killer. Meanwhile, Jessé continued to carry out his mission, leaving a trail of death and destruction in his wake. He was a man consumed by his belief, and there was nothing that could stop him. But as with all stories, there is always an end. And for Jessé, the end was near. The police finally discovered his identity and captured him, putting an end to his sinister mission. However, the question remains: what drives a person to commit such acts? Is it religion? Is it madness? Or is it something deeper and more complex? Jessé's story is a reminder that the line between sanity and madness is a fine one, and that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts. It is a story that makes us question human nature and reminds us that, at the end of the day, we are all capable of committing the most horrific acts. The nickname, Faith Maniac, was not fortuitous. Jessé wrapped his actions in a cloak of religious symbolism, twisting precepts and scriptures to justify his carnage. Faith, which should have been a beacon of hope and love, became in his hands an instrument of terror and death. His crimes were marked by biblical references and macabre rituals, transforming scenes of horror into unholy altars of his twisted belief. The police always found a Bible at the crime scene, with passages underlined that seemed to justify Jessé's actions. The first victim was a man who had been convicted of corruption. Jessé killed him with a shot to the head, leaving a Bible next to the body with the passage from Exodus 20:17 underlined, "You shall not murder." The police were puzzled by the symbolism, but soon realized that Jessé was using religion to justify his actions. The second victim was a woman who had been accused of adultery. Jessé killed her with a knife to the heart, leaving a Bible next to the body with the passage from John 8:7 underlined, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." The police began to realize that Jessé was using religion to judge and condemn his victims. Before we move on, subscribe to our World of Letters channel. Let's look at the third victim, who was a man who had been seen smoking marijuana in a park. Jessé followed him home and stabbed him to the neck. He left a Bible next to the body with the passage from 1 Corinthians 3:17 underlined. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. The list of victims continued to grow, and the police were increasingly perplexed by the religious symbolism that Jessé was using. It was as if he was trying to send a message, but the police did not know what it meant. As the police investigated, Jessé continued to commit his crimes, which became increasingly brutal and symbolic. He was convinced that he was doing God's will, and that his victims were sinners who needed to be punished. But, as in all stories, there is always an end, and for Jessé, the end was near. The police eventually discovered his identity and captured him, putting an end to his carnage. When questioned, Jessé confessed to all of his crimes, justifying them with his twisted religious beliefs. He believed that he was doing God's will, and that his victims were sinners who needed to be punished. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts. It is a story that makes us question human nature and reminds us that at the end of the day, we are all capable of committing the most terrible acts. The question that remains is, what drives a person to commit such acts? Is it religion? Is it madness? Or is it something deeper and more complex? The answer may never be found, but one thing is certain. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts, and that we must always question human nature and our own beliefs. The choice of Chicago as the setting for his crimes added a layer of dark irony. The city, known for its diversity, cultural vitality, and progressive spirit, became the setting for a moralistic and violent crusade. The contrast between the effervescence of urban life and the darkness of Jessé's crimes intensified the shock and horror that spread through the community. At the core of Jessé's disturbed mind lay a delusional belief in a heavenly mission. He saw himself as a divine messenger, tasked with purifying the world of sin and restoring moral order. This conviction inflated his ego, fueling a sense of superiority that placed him above human law and conventional morality. In his distorted view, his crimes were not murders, but acts of divine providence. He believed he was carrying out God's will by eliminating those he considered sinful and corrupt. This belief made him ruthless and remorseless, capable of committing acts of extreme violence without hesitation. Jessé's mind was a maze of confusing and contradictory thoughts. He believed he was doing good, but his actions were evil. He saw himself as a hero, but he was a murderer. This cognitive dissonance made him increasingly unstable and dangerous. The police were perplexed by Jessé's lack of remorse. He showed no sign of regret or guilt, even when confronted with evidence of his crimes. It was as if he was convinced that he was above the law and morality. Jessé's story is a classic example of how religion can be used to justify acts of violence and terror. He believed he was doing God's will, but in reality, he was merely satisfying his own desires for power and control. The question remains, what drives a person to commit such acts? Is it religion? Is it madness? Or is it something deeper and more complex? The answer may never be found, but one thing is certain. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts, and that we must always question human nature and our own beliefs. As the police continued to investigate Jessé's crimes, the town was in a state of shock and terror. People were afraid to leave their homes, fearing that they would be Jessé's next target. The police were doing everything they could to capture him and put an end to his carnage. But as with all stories, there is always an end. And for Jessé, the end was near. The police finally discovered his identity and captured him, putting an end to his carnage. When Jessé was brought to justice, he showed no sign of remorse or guilt. He believed that he had done the right thing and that he was being persecuted for his beliefs. But justice was not kind to him. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he would spend the rest of his life reflecting on his actions. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts, and that we must always question human nature and our own beliefs. It is a story that makes us reflect on the importance of tolerance and respect for the beliefs and opinions of others. To unravel Jessé's mind was to delve into an abyss of mental illness and religious fanaticism. His actions revealed not only a radical religious belief but also a profound psychological disturbance. The fine line between fervent faith and delusional insanity became increasingly blurred, raising disturbing questions about the nature of the human mind and the dangers of extremism. The psychiatrist who evaluated him after his capture reported that Jessé displayed classic symptoms of antisocial personality disorder, combined with a strong tendency toward religious fanaticism. He was incapable of feeling remorse or empathy for others and viewed his victims as mere objects to be eliminated in the name of his beliefs. Furthermore, Jessé had a strong tendency towards paranoia and megalomania, believing that he was chosen by God to fulfill a divine mission. He was convinced that he was above human law and that his actions were justified by his religious beliefs. The combination of these mental disorders and religious fanaticism made Jessé an extremely dangerous individual. He was capable of committing acts of extreme violence without any hesitation or remorse, and saw his victims as mere obstacles to be eliminated in the name of his beliefs. Jessé's story raises disturbing questions about the nature of the human mind and the dangers of extremism. How is it possible that a person can become so radicalized and fanatical that they commit acts of extreme violence in the name of their beliefs? The answer may lie in the complexity of the human mind and our ability to rationalize and justify our actions. When we combine this with religious fanaticism and paranoia, we can create an extremely dangerous individual, capable of committing acts of extreme violence without any hesitation or remorse. Jessé's story also reminds us of the importance of recognizing and treating mental disorders. Had Jessé received proper treatment for his mental disorders, it is possible that he would not have become so radicalized and fanatical. However, Jessé's story also reminds us that treating mental disorders is not an easy or quick fix. It is a complex and time-consuming process that requires the collaboration of mental health professionals, family, and friends. Jessé's story is a reminder that the human mind is complex and multifaceted, and that mental disorders can have devastating consequences if not treated properly. It is a reminder that we must always be alert to the signs of mental disorders and seek help when necessary. The presence of Satanism in Jessé's crimes added an even more complex and disturbing dimension. Paradoxically, in his crusade against sin, he flirted with the dark side of faith, using symbols and rituals associated with evil. This dark duality revealed the moral confusion and deep contradiction in his mind, where good and evil were intertwined in a tangle of fanaticism and violence. Investigators found a collection of books on Satanism and the occult in his apartment, as well as ritual objects and symbols associated with evil. It was as if Jessé was trying to conjure an evil power to help him in his mission of purification. The presence of Satanism in Jessé's crimes also raised questions about the influence of the media and popular culture in shaping his beliefs. He had grown up in a time when Satanism and the occult were becoming increasingly popular in youth culture, and it was possible that he had been influenced by these trends. However, it was also possible that the presence of Satanism in Jessé's crimes was simply a way of expressing his own moral confusion and inner contradiction. He was struggling with sin, but at the same time, he was surrendering to the dark side of faith. It was an internal struggle that was consuming him and driving him to commit increasingly violent and depraved acts. The story of Jessé is a reminder that the human mind is capable of creating monsters, and that moral confusion and inner contradiction can lead to acts of violence and destruction. It is a reminder that we must always be mindful of our own beliefs and values, and that we must always question authority and power. The investigation into Jessé's crimes continued for months, and investigators uncovered more and more evidence of his moral confusion and inner contradiction. They found diaries and letters that revealed his inner struggle and showed how he was becoming increasingly radicalized and fanatical. In the end, Jessé's story is a reminder that violence and destruction can be the result of moral confusion and inner contradiction. It is a reminder that we must always be aware of our own beliefs and values, and that we must always question authority and power. It is a reminder that the human mind is capable of creating monsters, and that we must always be vigilant to prevent these monsters from being created. To understand the genesis of the faith maniac, one must imagine a fictional biography that traces the roots of his fanaticism. A childhood marked by an extremist religious environment, perhaps traumatic experiences interpreted as divine tests, or a personality predisposed to obsessions and delusions. These elements combined could have shaped Jessé's mind, leading him down a path of violence and insanity. Imagine Jessé as a 10-year-old boy growing up in an extremely religious family. His father was a fundamentalist pastor who saw the world as a place of sin and corruption. Jessé's mother was a submissive woman who accepted her husband's beliefs and teachings without question. Jessé grew up in an environment where religion was used as a tool of control and manipulation. His father taught him to see the world as a place of struggle between good and evil, and that it was his responsibility as a true Christian to fight against sin and corruption. But Jessé was not like other boys. He was more sensitive, more introspective. He felt stifled by the extremist religious environment in which he lived. He began to question his father's beliefs and teachings, but was quickly silenced and repressed. This repression and lack of freedom to question and explore his own beliefs and thoughts may have contributed to the development of Jessé's fanaticism. He may have felt trapped and suffocated by his surroundings, and may have seen religion as a way to escape and free himself. In addition, Jessé may have had traumatic experiences in his childhood that were interpreted as divine tests. He may have seen these experiences as a sign that God had chosen him for a special mission, and that he had to fulfill this mission at any cost. These traumatic experiences, and Jessé's interpretation of them, may have contributed to the development of his obsessive and delusional personality. He may have become increasingly isolated and introspective, losing touch with reality and sinking into a world of fantasy and delusion. The combination of these factors, his extreme religious background, his traumatic experiences, and his obsessive, delusional personality, may have shaped Jessé's mind, leading him down a path of violence and insanity. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used as a tool of control and manipulation, and that traumatic experiences and an obsessive, delusional personality can contribute to the development of fanaticism and violence. It is also a reminder that the human mind is complex and multifaceted, and that people can be influenced by a variety of factors, including religion, culture, and personal experiences. Jessé's story is a warning that we must always be alert to the ways in which religion and other ideologies can be used to justify violence and oppression. It is a reminder that we must always question authority and power, and that we must always strive for justice and equality. Jessé's early murders may have been preceded by subtle signs, strange behavior, or radical statements that went unnoticed. The beginning of his crime spree may have been marked by less prominent victims, marginalized individuals who did not immediately attract the attention of the authorities. Gradually, Jessé's boldness grew, and his crimes became more elaborate and shocking. He began leaving messages and religious symbols at the crime scenes as if he were trying to send a message to the world. One of Jessé's first victims was a homeless man who lived on a street near the church where Jessé attended. The man was found dead, with a religious symbol carved into his chest. The police didn't pay much attention to the case, thinking it was a common street crime. But as the crimes continued, the police began to notice a pattern. All of the victims were marginalized people, and all of the crimes had a religious element. It was then that the police began to suspect that there was a serial killer on the loose, someone who was using religion to justify his crimes. The police began to canvass the churches and religious groups in the area, looking for someone who fit the profile of the killer. That's when they found Jessé, a man who described himself as a warrior for God and who had been seen handing out religious pamphlets on the streets. The police began monitoring Jessé, following him and recording his conversations. They discovered that he was planning a new crime, one that would be even more elaborate and shocking than the previous ones. The police knew they had to act quickly before Jessé could commit another crime. They planned an operation to capture him, using a team of special agents to apprehend him. The operation was a success, and Jessé was arrested without incident. He was taken to the police station, where he was questioned about his crimes. Jessé confessed everything, explaining how he had been called by God to punish sinners. He said that he had been guided by a divine voice which had instructed him to commit the crimes. The police were shocked by Jessé's confession and soon realized that they were dealing with an extremely complex case. They knew they had to work with psychiatrists and religious experts to better understand Jessé's mind and what had driven him to commit such crimes. Jessé's story is a reminder that religion can be used to justify the most heinous acts, and that it is important to be alert to the signs of radicalization and extremism. It is also a reminder that the human mind is complex and multifaceted, and that it is important to work with experts to better understand the motivations and thoughts of criminals. The Chicago police, confronted with the brutality and symbolism of the crimes, began a complex and challenging investigation. At first, the lack of obvious connections between the victims and the peculiar nature of the murders created confusion and uncertainty. Detective Carlos Jesus, an experienced and astute man, was assigned to lead the investigation. He knew he was dealing with an extremely difficult case, but he was determined to solve the mystery. As the investigation progressed, Carlos Jesus' team began to notice a pattern. The victims all had something in common. They had been seen in public places such as bars and restaurants before they were murdered. Carlos Jesus knew this was no coincidence. He began to suspect that the killer was choosing his victims based on their public behavior. Carlos Jesus' team also discovered that all of the victims had received an anonymous letter before they were murdered. The letter was always the same, with a message that said, "You will be judged." Carlos Jesus knew that this was a clear sign that the killer was motivated by a religious or moral belief. He began to suspect that the killer was someone who saw himself as a vigilante. As the investigation progressed, Carlos Jesus' team began to receive more and more information about the killer. They learned that he was a white, middle-aged man with a history of involvement with extremist religious groups. Carlos Jesus knew he was close to solving the case. He began working with the intelligence team to identify the killer and arrest him. But just when Carlos Jesus thought he had everything under control, he received a surprise. The killer had left him a message that said, "You will never catch me." Carlos Jesus knew this was a challenge. He was more determined than ever to solve the case and arrest the killer. Carlos Jesus' team worked tirelessly to identify the killer and arrest him. They followed every clue, every lead, until they finally found what they were looking for. The killer was arrested in a small apartment in the city center. He was identified as Jessé, a 45-year-old man with a history of involvement with extremist religious groups. Carlos Jesus was relieved and satisfied. He had solved the case and arrested the killer. But at the same time, Carlos Jesus couldn't help but wonder, what had driven Jessé to commit such crimes? What had motivated him to become a vigilante? These were questions Carlos Jesus could never answer, but he knew he had done his job and brought justice to the victims and their families. One of the most disturbing aspects of Jessé's crimes was the constant presence of religious symbolism at the crime scenes. Inverted crosses, biblical passages written in blood, bodies arranged in ritualistic positions. Every detail was meticulously planned to convey his twisted message and leave his macabre signature. As the crimes became more frequent and terrifying, panic set in throughout Chicago. The media, hungry for gruesome details, fed the public frenzy, amplifying the fear and hysteria. The city, once vibrant and confident, found itself hostage to the psychological terror imposed by the faith maniac. In his confession, Jessé showed no remorse or regret. On the contrary, he reaffirmed his unshakable belief in his mission and justified his crimes as acts necessary for the purification of the world. His faith, even in the face of human justice, would remain intact, revealing the depth of his fanaticism and the impermeability of his mind to reason and empathy. A diagnosis of mental illness would be inevitable. Jessé's mind, consumed by fanaticism and violence, would surpass the limits of sanity. However, the question of moral and legal responsibility would remain open, raising complex debates about the relationship between mental illness and criminality. The team of psychiatrists who evaluated Jessé after his arrest were unanimous in their diagnosis. He suffered from an antisocial personality disorder, combined with a psychotic disorder. The combination of these disorders left Jessé unable to control his impulses and to distinguish between good and evil. But despite the diagnosis, the question of Jessé's moral and legal responsibility remained open. He had committed horrific crimes, but it was also clear that he was not in his right mind when he committed them. The judge who presided over Jessé's trial was faced with this complex question. He knew that Jessé was a sick man, but he also knew that he had caused suffering and pain to many people. After much debate and reflection, the judge decided that Jessé would be found guilty of his crimes, but that he would be sent to a psychiatric hospital rather than prison. The decision was based on the idea that Jessé needed treatment and help rather than punishment. The judge's decision was met with mixed reactions. Some people thought it was fair, while others thought it was too lenient. But regardless of the view, it was clear that Jessé's case had raised complex and important questions about the relationship between mental illness and criminality. Jessé's story also raised questions about society's responsibility towards people with mental illness. If Jessé had been a sick man, why had he not received help and treatment before committing his crimes? These were questions that did not have easy answers. But regardless of the answer, it was clear that Jessé's case had left a profound mark on society, and that it had raised important questions about justice, morality, and humanity. Jessé's case also raised questions about freedom of speech and the responsibility of religious leaders. If Jessé had been influenced by extremist religious leaders, why had those leaders not been held accountable for their actions? These were questions that needed to be answered. And regardless of the answer, it was clear that Jessé's case had left a profound mark on society, and that it had raised important questions about justice, morality, and humanity. Jessé's story is a reminder that mental illness is a complex and multifaceted issue, and that there are no easy answers to the questions it raises. But whatever the answer, it is clear that we need to work together to create a more just and humane society for all. Jessé's story raises the crucial question: how can we spot a potential maniac? What are the warning signs that might indicate a mind on the brink? The answer lies in keeping a close eye on extremist behavior, hate speech, social isolation, and above all, in promoting tolerance, dialogue, and mental health. It is important to remember that the human mind is complex and multifaceted, and that there is no single profile of a potential maniac. However, there are some warning signs that can indicate a mind on the brink. One such sign is extremist behavior. If someone is becoming increasingly radicalized in their beliefs and opinions, this can be a warning sign. Additionally, if someone is beginning to express hate speech or intolerance, this can also be a warning sign. Another warning sign is social isolation. If someone is withdrawing from friends and family and is becoming increasingly isolated, this can be a warning sign. Additionally, if someone is beginning to lose touch with reality, this can also be a warning sign. Promoting tolerance, dialogue, and mental health is key to preventing radicalization and extremism. It is important to create an environment where people feel safe to express their opinions and beliefs, and where they are encouraged to listen to and respect the opinions and beliefs of others. Additionally, it is important to promote mental health and well-being. This may include creating support programs and resources for people who are struggling with mental health issues. Jessé's story is a reminder that prevention is the best way to avoid radicalization and extremism. It is important to be aware of the warning signs and promote tolerance, dialogue, and mental health. It is also important to remember that the responsibility does not lie solely with the individual, but also with society as a whole. It is important to create an environment where people feel safe and respected, and where they are encouraged to express their opinions and beliefs. Jessé's story is a reminder that prevention is the best way to avoid radicalization and extremism. It is important to be aware of the warning signs and promote tolerance, dialogue, and mental health. The legacy of the faith maniac would linger in Chicago, leaving emotional and social scars. The city, once shaken by terror, would seek to rebuild itself, learning painful lessons about the dangers of religious extremism and violence in the name of faith. Jessé's story would become a dark tale, a constant reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the depths of the soul. Fanaticism can distort faith and lead to tragedy. We must always be alert to the signs of radicalization and work together to create a more just and humane society. The story of Jessé, the faith maniac, serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of fanaticism and radicalization. His journey, marked by an oppressive family environment and distorted belief, illustrates how the human mind can spiral into violence and delusion. The use of religion as a justification for heinous acts not only challenges our understanding of morality, but also calls us to reflect on the fragility of the human condition. Jessé was not only a criminal, but a product of a system that failed to recognize and treat his profound mental disorders. The combination of his traumatic experiences, extreme beliefs, and social isolation shaped an individual capable of unimaginable atrocities. This complexity reminds us that promoting dialogue, understanding, and mental health in society is essential to preventing similar tragedies. As Chicago struggles to heal from the scars left by Jessé, the city carries with it lessons about the importance of empathy, tolerance, and vigilance. We must always be alert to signs of radicalization and act collectively to create a safe and welcoming environment where diversity of beliefs is respected and where violence in the name of faith never finds its place again. Jessé's story is an invitation to reflection and action, reminding us that together we can build a more just and humane society. If you are interested in Jessé's story and want to explore more intriguing topics about human nature, crime, and psychology, be sure to subscribe to our World of Letters channel. Turn on notifications to stay up to date with new content and reflections that can open your mind and provoke important discussions. Join us on this journey of knowledge and discovery. Click the sign up button now and become a part of our community.